Okay, so this is I put this together. There's sort of like three reasons why I ended up building this particular PowerPoint. First of all, it's because my memory. I had a hard time keeping track of who I said what to, and so I'd talk about some aspect, and then I'd find out that a couple minutes later I was talking to somebody else, and then it'd be like, okay, was it you that I told about the what phantom power really is? So that was one reason, so that I could put it all together in one place and talk about it once. Second reason is it makes sure that I actually cover all the points I want to. Again, helping my memory, make sure that I don't skip something just because I've got didn't get enough sleep last night or got my head rained on this morning or something. And finally, it's pictures. I'm visual and I learn well when I'm seeing things, and so it makes me feel like I'm helping you by giving you pictures, even if that's not how you learn. But it can help. It's one more piece to tie into. That handout that you got is a couple of. It's kind of what my experience has been are the pieces out of this PowerPoint that may be the most useful for you later on, the sorts of ones you're most likely to want to remember again. So okay, here we go. The things I'm going to try to cover are the three types of audio signal, how we handle them, what we do with them, what to watch out for. A decibel, what it is, where it grows, and why we care about it. Then we're going to look at an imaginary mixer, follow the signal through it, and see what it's doing, where it's going, what it encounters, and the order that it all happens. And we're going to look at equalizer. This is a chance to figure out what it does and then how to use it. Then a walk through the signal flow, how it relates to noise, gain structure, signal to noise ratio, and how we make use of that in a live and sound environment. Look at polar plots, and all of that builds us up to a point where we can understand what is feedback and what do we do about it. Okay, so the three signals. Mic level, line level, and speaker level. That's in ascending order. Speaker level is what goes to a speaker. Clever name, isn't it? And then there's mic level, and that's what comes from a microphone. Oh, another really good name. And then line level is pretty much everything else. So mic level, little tiny, measured in millivolts, microvolts. It is, because it is so small, because it's such a minor signal, we have to treat it very carefully. We put it in a cable that's preferably a twisted pair, which protects it from magnetic interference. We put a shield around it, which protects it from electromagnetic interference, and we try to keep it away from other signals that might interfere with it. As a result of being small, we don't need much cable for it to carry. It's a very low power signal as well. And this is what comes out of a microphone. In general, it is the microphone to a mic preamp. And that's the only place we encounter mic level signal, is that. And there's a good reason for that, because it being such a fragile signal, we want to get away from it as soon as possible. And so we'll run it through an amplifier, often called a preamp, that will turn it into line level. Line level is kind of what hooks up everything else together. The output of the keyboard is line level. A headphone jack is effectively line level. Back of a CD player or VCR or DVD player, that audio is line level. What goes out of the mixer and on its way to the amplifier is line level. What goes through an outboard equalizer is line level. It's the general purpose, handle it, send it everywhere. Technically, telephone, wired telephone signal is line level. It's able to travel miles without a shield. Very carefully twisted. So it's fairly sturdy, which is why it can survive miles of travel. Making it a twisted pair is a very good idea. Putting a shield around it is still a pretty good plan, but less necessary. It is not nearly so susceptible to interference from from other things that are happening around there. Still a very low power signal though, and so we don't need a big cable for it. And actually for all of these, we usually end up with a copper wire that's bigger than necessary as far as the signal is concerned, just so that it's sturdy enough to survive us holding on to it. All right, then we run it through a power amp and we get to speaker level. Speaker level is measured in volts. It is a lot larger. Actually, it is so big, so powerful that this is now the bully. This is the guy who can cause interference onto a mic line. So in designing a system, I try to keep the microphone and the speaker signals at least a little bit apart so that there's less chance of the speaker signal interfering. Now we put it on a twisted pair, not to protect it, but to help contain the magnetic field so that it doesn't get out and cause trouble with the other signals that might be nearby. It is a high power signal though, and so being high power, we need a much more substantial cable in order to carry that and effectively control the speaker at the other end. And pretty much it only goes to speakers. Headphone level technically kind of is a speaker impedance sort of thing, but it's very, very low level speaker, and so it's things bigger than that. So a box like that needs speaker level. So in order to go from down on our list, we need some sort of an amplifier, whether it's a preamp or a power amp. We're increasing the energy. That energy has to come from somewhere, either it's a battery or we plug it into wall out or something, but there's some electronics that have to amplify it and make it a larger, higher voltage, higher power signal. Going the other direction, it's possible to just use a passive, unpowered set of resistors or something like that to soak up the extra and go down from, say, speaker level to line level, or like a direct box going from line level down to mic level. I guess I should mention that for just a moment. A direct box, useful tool for interfacing line level things into your mic level inputs. It kind of does three jobs. It matches an it makes it balanced impedance. That is a valuable tool for carrying a long distance. Used to be that high impedance and low impedance was a big deal, and we had to watch out for that, but in the last 20 years or so, pretty much everything is low impedance, and so that's not really a factor. The exception is electric guitar pickups. Those are still high impedance. So you want to, for those of you that remember that, oh, you can't have long high impedance cables, that still applies for the guitar pickup between the guitar, the electric guitar, and the first thing that plugs into. That cable should be kept as short as practical. After that, it's low impedance. It travels long distance very well. So that's one reason for the direct box, is to aid in making the signal balanced, which is a good way of avoiding noise. Second thing is it actually does drop the level from line level to a strong mic level. That means that it fits very nicely in plugging in, just like any of your other microphone sources. It's not like you have to somehow treat it different. It's like, oh, well, this is the keyboard, and so I can't plug it into that 3-pin XLR connector. I've got to use this and plug it into the other jack. It makes life easier back there at the mixer, because now we're effectively dealing with all mics. The third thing is phantom power. That phantom power can cause problems to some equipment, and so by using a direct box, we can keep that phantom power away from things like keyboards. Most equipment handles it fairly well now, but way back in the 70s, one of the very early Korg synthesizers, I talked to a fellow who saw one start on fire because phantom power showed up where it didn't belong. Okay. So to help you wrap your brain around, here's one of my pictures. Wrap your brain around these signals. I decided I'd make a chart so we could show them. So the small, a weak mic level signal, I said, is 1 mil. That's about the thickness of a manila folder. All right. And then a strong mic signal is 1/2 inch. All right, that's something we can grasp. Well, at that kind of scale, I end up with almost 1/4 mile long line to try to show what the speaker level is. So if I make the speaker level signal actually fit on the screen, now we got these, the mic level and the line level all look like just skinny little lines. We're talking about a difference of, look at that, 0.000025 volts up to 40 volts. Huge range. Well, to help tame that, some clever fellows, mathematicians, said, hey, we can solve that with logarithms. Now, I'm going to expect everyone to be able to solve a natural log before. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. You don't have to know how to work a logarithm. Yeah. That's why we're doing this now, so that you don't, the logarithm simply tames those kind of distances. Now, it happens that our ears tend to hear logarithmically, and so this really works out very nicely. So when I display it logarithmically, we get a nice little stair step where it all fits onto the screen at the same time, and we can see that, all right, well, there's the quiet one, the loud one, the mic level, for the mic levels, and then the line level and the speaker level. And if we could, and those ratios, the relationship between them on the screen is going to match about how much we're going to say it sounds different as well, if we could actually hear that. So over there on the left side, I've got that scaled in a curious set of numbers there, that positive and negative numbers, and the dBu down there at the bottom. That's decibels. So next we get to look at a decibel. What is it? Well, decibel is 1/10 of a bell. And the bell is a unit that the telephone engineers from Bell Labs developed as a way of measuring the amount of signal that is lost over 1 mile of standard telephone cable. Yes. And what? Yeah, okay, good, yeah. Yeah, sure. So that's what a decibel is. That helps, doesn't it? No, it doesn't. Okay, I'll keep talking. They did name it after Alexander Graham Bell after a while, decided the transmission unit wasn't a good name for it. Right. So what we need to know about it is that it is a comparison. And remember, it was how much signal is lost over a mile. That's saying from when we started to when we ended. It's input to output. It is this as compared to that. It is always a comparison. That means that if we only mention half of that, if we don't have that other thing we're talking about and comparing, it becomes useless. It'd be like saying, well, how much does that mixer cost? Twice? Twice as much as the candy bar? Twice as much as a house? Twice as much as the old one? Twice as much as I wanted to pay? Twice doesn't really tell us anything unless we have the other half, the thing we're comparing it to. Well, when we're talking about money, we can use dollars as a standard reference. When we're dealing with sound, that decibel, the dB, we can put another letter after it. We can just make up any letter. No, we can't just make up any letter we want. There are some established standards. For example, dBu, that stands for decibel unloaded. 0.775 volts is 0. We have a standard. We have a reference. So now, and then there's also dBm, dBV, dBSPL. dBV is one that shows up. That's what consumer equipment is rated at. So if you see that the output of a CD player is rated at -10 dBV, that's saying 1 volt is the 0 reference point. dBSPL, that's one you may have heard of. That stands for sound pressure level. That is sound in the air. That is referenced to a particular micropascal pressure relationship. So it's measuring changes in the air pressure is the 0 point for that one. dBFS, that stands for full scale. That shows up in almost all digital equipment. Because the way a digital system works, it can handle, it's using a number to represent it. And when that number is full, it can't represent any signal louder than that. That becomes 0 dB full scale. So in a digital system, generally there isn't anything bigger than 0. So all the numbers are negative. Boy, isn't that intuitive. So now it's bigger, so it's a smaller number, and now we have to deal with negative. Anyway, so dBu is the most common one that's used for professional sound reinforcement. So let's look here at this chart again. There we have it shown in dBu. So we can see that the line level signal is right there at 0 dBu, and we can see that we have signals louder than that and quieter than that. And by saying that it's dBu, we are technically saying that line level signal is exactly the same as the standard that established 0.77 volts as 0 point. So instead of having to say all of that, we just use that letter U to represent it, so we know that that's really what's going on. All kind of making sense? All right. So now we're going to look at a mixer. We're going to follow the signal as it goes through. I made this one up, sort of a composite of a whole bunch of mixers I've encountered over the years. If there's any relationship to a real one, it's purely coincidental. But that's kind of what it looks like physically. See, we've got a gain or a trim knob at the top and some equalizer knobs and some aux knobs, and there's a PFL or solo button and a mute button, and then there's the slider, fader thing down at the bottom. That's kind of like what one channel looks like, don't you think? Well, that's what we see, but inside the electronics don't necessarily, those electrons are not following that path necessarily. So the block diagram, almost guarantee that your manual has a block diagram. It is effectively the roadmap of the inside of your mixer, and it is a useful reference tool if you are trying to do something unusual, trying to understand how that signal is going through. So there's the block diagram for my imaginary mixer. Notice that no, go back. Notice that the block diagram, that the fader isn't at the end of the signal flow. It's smack dab there in the middle. How about that? And the aux knobs are not all together. So it's not quite exactly the same as what we see physically laid out on the mixer. So let's take a closer look. The slider, right? Is that? So, as the signal comes in, the first thing that it comes to is the mic preamp, and related to that is the gain knob, sometimes called trim or sensitivity. What's it called on that mixer? Gain? Okay. All right. That is that's what evens out the signal. When you have a quiet source or a loud source, that's the spot where you adjust for it. When the signal comes in, it comes into that, and if we were doing test signals, if all we were messing with test signals, it'd be so easy because it wouldn't change, and we could adjust for the loud one and the quiet one, and we could look at the meter, and we could get them both exactly the same, and wouldn't that be great? We're dealing with musicians, well, they're doing music, and music is this always changing thing. So that makes it a little bit more difficult for us to figure out. But nevertheless, the purpose of that knob is to compensate for the loud microphone versus the quiet microphone, the loud singer versus the quiet singer. Once you have that set, and you're looking at all the rest, the position of all the rest of the knobs, you shouldn't be able to tell who is the loud one and who is the quiet one, because that is supposed to compensate for it. Notice that changing that is going to change everything else. That's worth noting. That means that if you have just worked long and hard to get the monitor mix just exactly the way the musicians want, and then you go, oh, let's change the gain. Whoops, by changing the gain, I changed the monitor mix as well. I changed the fader, the amount of sound coming out for the main speakers as well. That knob changes everything after it in that channel. That's good, but it's also a gotcha. It's good because when I am setting it up, I want to set that first, and Yeah, on your mixer, when you push the solo or PFL button, it will change the meter to be displaying the adjustment for that knob. So you can look at, so let's say you push the solo button on the guitar channel. Now you're seeing on your main meter the guitar level on a nice big long meter. And you can turn it down, you can turn it up, and you can set the guitar channel looking at it. Then you can go to vocal 1 and see that one and adjust it. Go to vocal 2 and adjust that one so that it's about the same. Go to vocal 3 and adjust that so that it's about the same. And if you do that during that first song, during rehearsal, you have just compensated the fact that Susie has a bit of a cold, and so isn't singing quite as loud as she usually does. Or that the guitar player ended up with a volume turned up just a bit more than he did did last week, or whatever. Yeah. The keyboard player, then. So that's the purpose of that knob is evening that all out. Now, there's another reason for it we can get to a little later on when we get to the signal to noise ratio part. But we want that signal as loud, as high as we can possibly have it, and never risk overloading. So the mixer has a limit. It can only take a signal that is so loud before it starts to distort and doesn't sound good. Again, if we're doing test signals, we could adjust that level to that point, right there, almost but not quite. But we've got music. And that signal is always changing, and so we have to allow for the unexpected. Musicians always get louder during the service than they do during rehearsal. We have to allow for that unexpected and for the fact that this is an always moving signal. But we don't want it, the signal way down here if this is our limit. We want it up here as loud as we practically can without risking it overdriving, overloading. Yes? Perfect. Perfect isn't really the right word because we're dealing with musicians and not test signals. Nope. That's what that meter is for. You push the solo button, and you look at the meter, and you are seeing the signal on that one channel, and you adjust the gain so that you have lots of signal, but when they are really loud, it's not reaching the limit, the peak. Right, right. A deaf person could do that. But you have to guess. My experience is that every musician is louder during the service than during rehearsal. And every musician is different as to how much louder they are during the service than rehearsal. Some, it's just a little bit, and some, it's like, oh my goodness. We got to give them lots of room, because in the service, they get going. And so there isn't a, here's the perfect spot. It's more, this is a target range. Right. So on an analog mixer, I generally aim for just below what generally shows up on the meter as 0. Usually the meter shows minus numbers, 0, and then probably about up to plus 18 or something like that. Plus 16. It's a close guess. Those are actually decibels. So from the 0 point to the 16, which is overload, is 16 decibels. That's actually a pretty noticeable difference in volume. So if you aim for, during rehearsal, the average jump in the meter is just a little bit above the 0 point, you probably have room for them to get louder and for surprises, and it'll all still fit. It's more that you want to avoid that the loud stuff is making the minus 30 light up. That's too quiet. The corollary to all that is there isn't a correct or an incorrect position for that knob. I can't look at the knob and say, oh my, they've got that knob turned way up. That's not good. There isn't a right and a wrong position. It's a matter of where's the signal level. And if that means you have to turn it all the way up, that's okay. You might get some noise as a result, but that's the position it needs to be. If it's all the way down and that turns it down far enough, great. Does that one have a pad switch? Okay. Pad is a companion to that gain. We'll have to look at the back of the mixer or the block diagram and figure out whether that switches the connector as well. All right. I'll briefly mention that some mixers have a pad that's a companion to that, and it's sort of a range extender, so that if you get that knob turned all the way down and you need to turn it down some more, you can engage the pad, and that's like an extra 20 decibels that disappear. Okay. And so you push the button in, and you have to turn the knob up 20 dB, and it's exactly the same. You take the knob out, so you can get all the way down, and if you need to go some more, you engage the knob, and engage the button, the pad button, and then you can move the knob back up, and you can keep in, or the other direction. If the pad is engaged, and you get all the way to the top, and that's not enough, you take the pad off, and now the knob jumps down a ways, and you can... Okay, so now we're going to follow that signal on through. We've got the gain. We understand what the gain's doing there. So the next thing that it comes to are these aux knobs. Now these particular ones are called pre-fader. Aux is just short for auxiliary. Pre-fader means that it is tapping in to that flow before the fader. That means that moving the fader is going to have no effect on it. You can see my little box there that says fader. There's no reason why any change there would have any effect to those aux 1 and aux 2 knobs there at the top. Pre-fader is a good place for a monitor mix to come off. That means that as I'm moving the faders, adjusting for what it sounds like in the house, I'm not changing what the musicians are hearing. That's generally good. The aux 1 from all of the channels get blended together and go out the aux 1 master, and then in your system go to the amplifier for that one speaker over there. And you get to determine how much of this particular channel is going to be ending up in that particular... So it's actually kind of like you've got multiple mixers inside the one mixer. You've got that row of knobs for aux 1 that's creating a mix. And you've got the row of knobs for aux 2, and you've got the row of faders. And each one of these can have a different relationship of each of these channels. So you can have lots of guitar in aux 1 by turning aux 1 knob way up. You can have very little guitar in aux 2 by turning it way down, and then you move the fader, and that's what's going to be adjusting what is out here in the main for the congregation, and you can have a medium amount. All right, now I've got a little box there having the scary sounding EQ, equalizer, in it. Notice in this mixer that the equalizer is after aux 1 and aux 2. That means that no matter what I do with the EQ, it's not going to have any effect on aux 1 and aux 2. I don't know how your mixer is. We'll have to look at the block diagram to see. Sometimes it's before, sometimes it's after. Sometimes there's a switch. Nevertheless, it's good to know, because if Tim says, "Man, can you turn the mid-range down on my voice in the monitor?" and he's on aux 1, on this mixer I'd have to say, "No." No, it'll only change out here. It'll have no effect on your monitor at all, because it's after the aux. The aux has already come off. It's come off and it's on its way. It's done and gone, and then it gets to the equalizer. So that equalizer will have no effect on aux 1 and aux 2 on this particular mixer. So the next thing I've got down there is that PFL, sometimes called solo. PFL stands for pre-fader listen. That's what goes to the headphones. Really handy tool to be able to listen to just this one channel or just these two channels in the headphones. You can see on this one that is before the mute switch. That means that, I can have the channel muted while I'm listening on the headphones. So let's say we've got a bad mic cord, and I send my assistant up here to figure out whether it's the cord or the microphone or something like that. I can have the headphones on back there, the channel muted, and I can be listening to it. Yeah, it's still crackling. Try something else. And I don't have to be, that can like almost be happening during the service if I needed to, but I wouldn't have to be making lots of noise. Yes? Yes. You notice anything else about where this mute switch is? Like maybe relating to aux 1 and aux 2? It doesn't mute aux 1 and 2. There actually really is a mixer out there like this where the mute doesn't actually mute everything. I think yours does. I'm pretty sure yours, when you push the mute, the only place the signal can still come out to the headphones. Yes, except I think your headphones is actually after the EQ. So this is why we need to look at your block diagram to see exactly for sure where all this. So then we get to the fader. That's that slidey up and down thing at the very bottom of the mixer. The primary purpose of that is to adjust the sound that you and the congregation hears. Your role is to sort of be the ears of the congregation and adjust the sound so that what they hear is a pleasant mix. Pleasant and effective mix. All right, so moving along down to the next. This is just panned down so we can see a little more. There's the faders now more toward the top. And then we get to aux 3 and 4 on this mixer. Those are post fader. Some mixers you have a switch that lets you pick whether it's going to be pre or post fader. And you think about the term post fader, that sort of makes sense then that would be after the fader. That means that moving the fader affects it. That's not quite so good for stage monitors. Works really good for things like recording or the assistive listening, the hearing impaired, or hallway speakers, or something like that, because there you might want to you want it to follow what you're doing with the faders. Then we get to the pan knob. Technically, that is a pan just like you would have on your home stereo system, where it's an adjustment or for panning between left and right. But in live sound, that typically turns into a 3-position switch. All the way to the left, all the way to the right, or right in the middle. That's because it ties in with the subgroup assignment switches. Because it's not really so much panning left and right, it's panning left odd and right even, or something like that. So you can see that there's the left-right button. You can follow those little lines. When I push the left-right button, I am getting either left or right or both, depending upon where I have that pan knob. Same with subgroup 1, subgroup 2, and subgroup 3 and subgroup 4, is that they're coming in pairs, and if I want only one of the pair, I have to use the pan knob. So if I wanted the signal to only go to subgroup 3, do you guys use the subgroups? Okay. If I wanted to only go to subgroup 3, I would have to push that 3-4 button and then take the knob and go over toward the left. And that would route the signal only to subgroup 3. Now, if I decided I also wanted it to go out subgroup 2, but I didn't want it out subgroup 1, how would I do that? That'll get it out number 2. But how do I get it out number 3 then, at the same time? Oops, you can't. You can't have it on only 2 and 3 because 2 needs the knob this way and 3 needs the knob this way. That's how yours is. Almost guarantee this is how yours is. So the point is that if you're only trying to send it to one place, no problem. You can send it anywhere. If you're wanting to send it to 2 places, now your choices are somewhat being made for you. Just to be aware of. It said subgroup is a submix. Yeah, that's that classic example. How many microphones do you have on the drums? Probably about 6, 8. Okay, let's say you have 8 microphones on there, and you've worked hard. You've got the cymbal there, the kick there, the snare there, and you've got this position of the faders in order to get the drums sounding the way. That's like, okay, they sound good. Now, I realize nobody really ever says this, but then they say, turn up the drums. Okay, you've got these faders just kind of, how are you going to turn up the drums? Or, for that matter, turn them down? You could try to move all of them evenly. But wouldn't it be easier if you had all of those going through a master, and you could just move the master? Like have a subgroup of just those channels? That's what the subgroup is for. So if you could, say, take the drums and put them all on subgroup 1, then my subgroup 1 slider is all of those microphones turned into one slide. There we go. Well, as part of the setup, I would take all of the drum microphones and push the 1-2 button, and I would move them all to the left. So now they're all set to subgroup 1. And I'd make sure that nothing else was going to subgroup 1. And now it's as though I've turned that into its own little sort of separate mixer that's sitting next to my main mixer. And that subgroup 1 master now becomes how much I hear in the room of the drums is controlled by, I can turn the drums up and down evenly together by using that subgroup 1. Another practical use for subgroup is voices and instruments. So when I run sound, I often split it up that way. So that all of the voices are on, well, let's say subgroup 3, and all of the instruments are on subgroup 4. Because I find that often I'm wanting to change the relationship between voices and instruments. An example of that would be we're singing a hymn, and everybody knows this one. And they're singing with gusto. We don't really need the voices up here. We have enough instrumentation that everybody can follow along. Then we get to verse 4. We've never sung verse. Do we ever sing verse 4 before? Oh, so now I turn the instruments down and the voices up so that the congregation has something to follow, because they're not real confident of the words anymore. But that relationship between the voices and the instruments, if I had to do that with all of the faders, these pull down these 5 vocalists and turn up these 6 instruments, I would decide it wasn't worth the effort. But by having it on a subgroup, that kind of relationship is really easy to. Okay, well I kind of skipped over that EQ block, so we're gonna go back and cover that now. Equalizer, pretty typical. Nope, don't go back. Too quick. A high knob, a low knob. Mid has a level and a frequency. All right, so you got 2 mids or something like that. I'd be surprised. Okay, so there's actually 6 knobs then. All right, but the principle of what those mids are doing is going to be the same. So, okay, so frequency. We better figure out what frequency is. Frequency is measured in hertz. Now you can switch the screen. Measured in hertz, which is cycles per second. That is, well, it very much relates to what a musician would call the note, the pitch that's being played. So I built this chart. This is in your handout. To sort of tie all of this together and give you a grasp of various frequencies. Commonly understood that the human hearing range is 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. I don't think anybody here can still hear 20,000 hertz. I don't know that I ever remember being able to hear that high, but it was close. Anyway, so there across the bottom, those numbers at the bottom, 20, 50, 100, 200, 1K, 5K, 10K, 20K, that is the frequency. That is hertz. Just above that, I have the note name for the letters that a musician is going to recognize, with middle C there highlighted as a way of giving you some kind of reference. And then those blue bars represent the range of notes that a particular instrument can play. So we've got the human voice and the guitar pretty much covering the same range of that's showing that the human voice can get all the way down to about 60 hertz. That's a low bass singer, but okay. And a bass guitar and a flute. And look at there, right about middle C. They all can play a middle C. Can you tell the difference between the flute, the guitar, the piano, if they're all playing middle C? Yeah. But it's the same note. It's the same frequency. What's the difference? The difference is in the harmonics. And the harmonics are all higher than the fundamental. The fundamental is what the musician is saying. That's the pitch it's playing. It's playing a middle C. But the sound that's being created is not just that 230 hertz. It is from there up, higher, up and beyond. And those harmonics is what create the character of that particular instrument, whether it's a voice or whether it's a guitar string. What makes it sound different is all those harmonics. So realize that even though we can say, the bass guitar never plays a note that's higher than 500 hertz, that doesn't mean that there is that we could chop it off at 500 hertz and say, we don't need anything above there. That's a bass guitar. If the guitar player is slapping the strings, that snap can be creating stuff all the way up to 5-6 kilohertz, even though the note he's playing isn't anywhere near that high. So that's the harmonics. When we're talking about voice, then let's jump up to the very top part, the consonants and the vowels. It's actually a fuzzy range and it kind of overlaps, but in general, the vowels would be the mid-range area, the roundness, the o. That is all the vowel range. Intelligibility tends to be in the consonants, the T, the D, S, F. The difference between those is all very high frequencies. That's high frequencies, 1 kilohertz and up. Have you ever had a conversation on a particular cell phone where the person was plenty loud but you couldn't understand a thing they were saying? That is because the high frequency is chopped off. So now we get to that magenta range there in the middle that is some frequency limited stuff that might give you a grasp, a handle, a starting point on what some of these frequencies mean. Landline telephone is limited to 3 kilohertz, 300 to 3 kilohertz. Cell phone, they will often chop it off at even less than that, 2 kilohertz, 1.5. And so by the time it's done, I'm putting a high frequency filter on my voice. I'm blocking the high frequencies. So now O, no trouble there at all, is it? T, D, F, S. Okay, I just stopped you from hearing the consonants. And now you can't tell the difference between those letters. Mid-range is coming through just fine. So now you've got a clue. When you're listening to somebody, and like, boy, this just isn't sounding right. Is it the vowels? Is it the consonants? Is it the roundness, fullness, body? Or is it the sparkle, the intelligibility part of it? Does it sound like he's on a telephone? Does it sound like it's an FM radio? Those are all bits and pieces that can give you a starting point of, well, I've got an equalizer. I've got a bunch of knobs. Is this high, mid, or low? Well, I give you a place to start. Maybe tell you exactly where, but at least a starting point, a handle, a beginning place. Okay, so frequency. We kind of know what frequency is. This is a frequency response chart. Across the bottom, I have those frequencies. It's just like what is on the big chart we were just looking at. We have the 20 all the way up to 20,000 hertz. Then over on the left, I have dB. Notice there's no letter after those numbers. That is decibels, but I'm comparing an input to an output. What changes as it goes through my EQ section. So I don't care what the level actually is. I'm looking at the difference inputs to output. So a volume control is going to affect all frequencies equally. At least it's supposed to. So I can turn it up, I can turn it down, and you can see that all the frequencies have changed evenly. Another description for an equalizer would be a frequency-specific volume control. Think about those words for just a minute. Frequency-specific volume control. That is, a volume control for only some frequencies, but not all of them. So here, on my imaginary mixer, I've turned up the high-frequency knob, and you can see that I have turned up only the high frequencies. You go back to that, think back to that chart of consonants and vowels, that is smack dab in the middle of the consonant range. Right up there, about 5 kilohertz. Well, if the consonants seems to be lacking, yes, you could try turning that up. Well, there's always that. You got to have something, you're talking kind of like this, and you don't have a whole lot of consonants to start with. Yeah. So I can turn it up or I can turn it down. But the frequency that it's affecting was decided by an engineer sitting at his desk saying, let's see, those folks there, they're going to need it at 5 kilohertz. Yeah, they're going to have all their high frequency problems at 5 kilohertz. Right, yeah, sure. But that's what it is. He decided, and those components in the mixer determine that it's 5 kilohertz and that's all it can be. Well, that's good. I'm glad he gave us that, but it's not always what we want. So we get to this mid-range, and I have not just frequency, but I have not just level, where I can turn it up and down, but I also have a frequency. So as the user, the operator, I get to pick, is it affecting a low frequency or a high frequency? Where in that mid-range do I want it to change it? So now I've got two knobs working together for one chunk, one band of the equalizer. This is called a semi-parametric. So that means that I get to decide, is it the high mid-range, a mid-mid-range, a mid-low mid-range, or a low mid-low mid-range that needs to be adjusted? Exactly. This moved to exactly the same spot, right? Actually, it overlaps a little bit. Now, if you think about that for a minute, you could have the high frequency turned up and that sweeping one, that adjustable one, turned down at the same frequency. And what you end up with is just sort of a funny little wiggle, because they're not going to exactly cancel out. But effectively, you can completely cancel out the effect. You turn it up with this knob and turn it down with this knob. Well, that didn't really gain you anything. Didn't help you at all. Well, the level, on that mid one, the level knob is determining how much, and the frequency is determining where. So this is showing what would be called 3-band of equalizer. 3 chunks. There's the high one, the low one, and the 2 knobs for the mid. Yep. On this one, the high is fixed, the low is fixed, and the mid I get 2 knobs. So I can choose the how much and the where. And the level does the up and down for just that middle one. That means that if the level is adjusted to the middle spot, is changing the frequency knob going to change my sound? No. All I'm doing is like choosing where I've grabbed it, but I haven't made a change. Going to mention the full parametric. Shows up on digital consoles, in DSPs and other things like that. It gets me one more control. So I end up with 3 knobs for each band. Not just how much, up and down. Not just where, but how wide of an area. Narrow or wide. That's called bandwidth or Q. Your mixer doesn't have that. I'm mentioning it because you might encounter one that does at some point. Like I said, almost all digital mixers have that, and they're getting pretty common now. So, all right. Any questions yet on EQ before I move on to other stuff? Guess not. Okay. Signal to noise ratio is pretty much just what it sounds like. Noise. Now, this is not necessarily kids crying or the lawnmower or other things like that that might be considered noise. This is noise in electronics. Yes. This is in particular, yes. That is caused by the molecules bouncing around. There is no way to get past it. None. Except making it absolute zero, and nobody's done that yet. It is just an inherent part of electronics. All electronics will have that. It's called thermal noise, caused by the fact that electrons and molecules and atoms are bouncing around, and pieces go flying off, and it's kind of random. Such that really high sensitivity, like the radio telescope equipment, they use like liquid hydrogen to cool their electronics to cut down on thermal noise. Now, I have never seen an audio mixer that goes to that extreme, but technically it could. So that's noise. Inherent part. Now, there's certain things we can do on a design that the engineer can do on a design that will minimize that, but it is a permanent fixed. Every section of the mixer will have some noise. All right, so then we have signal. So there's our signal, there's our noise, and we look at the ratio between them. So from minus 90 to minus 10 is 80, so the signal to noise ratio is 80 dB. Now, we're not dealing with test signals, we're dealing with music, and so that signal level is always changing. So now it's 30 decibels, because this is the other half of the syllable. So when you see a specification for signal to noise ratio, usually what that means is actually maximum signal to noise ratio, which is going to be the maximum amount of signal that it can go through that particular section without overloading. I think the next slide is. So the maximum amount of signal it can go through without distortion and the inherent noise. Maximum signal to noise ratio. That's what that specification really means. Now, each and every section in the mixer has its own amplifier and has its own noise. So there's actually a whole bunch in there. But I'm going to simplify this, and we're just going to make it down to 3. So the mic preamp, the mixer output, and the power amp, because that's where you actually have volume controls. So we've got a microphone signal coming in. Well, we say it's about minus 85 dB. It runs into the input of the mixer, goes into the mic preamp, and gets amplified. That mic preamp has inherent noise that's showing up there is that little red spot. The green is our signal. Now the signal leaves the mic preamp and travels on its way to the mixer output. At this point, that noise is no longer a separate piece. It is now a permanent, inseparable, fused component of the signal. It is part of the signal now. No way to separate it, no way to remove it. It is the signal. That's why we want that gain knob turned up as much as we can. It's because we want our signal to be as loud as possible so that it is as far away as possible from that noise. So we've got a noise portion. Now we get to the mixer output, and we say, whoo, boy, it's too loud. So I turn down that master fader on the mixer. and I make it quieter. I'm turning down the signal part. I'm turning down the noise part of what came in, but now that mixer output section has its own inherent noise that it smacks there over the top of it. So now as it leaves the mixer, ooh, you see what happened? My noise is almost half of my signal now. Now it gets to the power amplifier, gets amplified, that noise portion amplifies with it. So now I will hear coming out of my speakers. So the solution to that is to turn it down at the power amp, not at the mixer. Now this becomes part of system setup, not necessarily so much a matter of operation. But in operation, this principle means you turn it up as much as you can, as early in the signal chain as you can. So at that gain knob, turn it up as far as you can. Now realizing that you turn it up too far and it starts to distort and sound bad, but short of that, you turn it up as much as you can, as early in the chain as possible, and then you turn it down. You need to turn it down as late in the chain as possible. And if you actually have a consistent problem of hearing out your speakers, and you end up with that master fader way down all the time, I would say you turn down the amplifiers so that you can turn that master fader up, and it'll be just as loud in the room, but you'll get rid of your hiss. Can it make sense? Now we get to polar plots. Mostly system setup. So from an operation standpoint, turn it up early in the chain, turn it down late in the chain. That means that if you have the choice, don't run the master fader up really high and turn gains down in order to get the volume the right level. Do it the other way around, and it will have less noise. So polar plots. It really doesn't have anything to do with polar bears or B-rate movies. I just found a cute clip art of a polar bear, and so I stuck it in there. Yeah, he's walking away now. So it is polar plots. A physical representation, a graphical representation of signal in a three-dimensional space. So what that actually looks like is kind of like that. It's called cardioid because it's sort of heart-shaped, and cardioid means heart-related. That look like a heart? Well, I guess it kind of does. That's showing that we have 0 degrees and 180 degrees, 90 degrees, so that's showing my three-dimensional space, and then the closer it is to the middle, the less signal there is. This would be like for a microphone, and the microphone would be in it like that. So that's what it's representing, is that if I have sound coming straight into the front of the microphone, or 45 or 90 degrees off to the side, or coming in from the back, I can see by how far out on the ring my line is, indicating how much signal, how much electrical signal is created for the acoustic sound that's coming in. So on this particular microphone, it is a very nice cardioid pattern that sound coming directly from the back is like way, way quieter than sound coming from the front or from the sides. Beautiful. Another common pattern is omnidirectional, which sounds like it ought to be the same in all directions. This is the mic design, and when the sound is coming to the microphone, how much signal is it creating? So on that one, sound that was coming from the back makes almost no signal at all. Sound that's coming straight from the side is making exactly the same amount of signal that's coming in the front. If the sound was coming in sort of back angle, it's quieter, but not all the way gone. Kind of making sense? So if I was standing there holding that microphone and I turned it like this, I would start getting quieter, because my sound is coming at it from the back side, and as it comes around to the front, it's getting louder again. Making sense? Right. If this is near the monitor, the sound from the monitor, keeping in mind that in a room like this, any sound that's created tends to bounce around, and it'll eventually get into the front of the microphone. But still, if this was the microphone here near the monitor, if is a good cardioid pattern, it's not going to hear much of the monitor itself, and it will be hearing sound from over here. That making sense? You're looking like you're not quite catching this. Probably. So there are some cardioids that are like this. So this microphone, in theory, is going to be picking up just as well from out this direction. It doesn't matter where it's pointed so much. All right, omnidirectional. Sounds like it ought to pick up from all directions evenly. Now, not quite. Notice that from the back, it's not quite as good as from the front, but it's pretty close to even. In the real world, microphones are all of the are both. There is what a typical microphone polar plot is going to look like. You can see that I've got dot line for the 5 kilohertz, a dash line for 1 kilohertz, and a solid line for 500 hertz. So at 500 hertz, it's omnidirectional, and at 5 kilohertz, it's a pretty directional microphone. It depends upon frequency. So now, if I'm talking into the front of the microphone, all is well, because I've got everything. Now, if I happen to get lazy and I start talking into the microphone like this, 5 kilohertz is being turned down. 5 kilohertz. That's like consonant territory. Hey, that means it's like somebody just turned the 5 kilohertz down on the mixer. It's effectively the same thing because I'm talking into the side of the microphone. What if I'm a keyboard player and I'm singing that means the sound guy has to have his fingers on that 5 kilohertz knob, turning it up and down. Yeah, right. Turn it up, turn it down, turn it up, turn it. Wow. But yeah, that's what it means. Or that person who's doing this as they're talking. The EQ is changing all over everywhere, depending upon the microphone. And what's happening to that frequency is going to vary from one microphone to the next. Years ago, the microphone that got handed around, the general purpose announcement microphone, I ended up finding a microphone that actually had a very consistent off-axis frequency response. So even if it was being talked into like this, it sounded very similar to like this. So that when I got those people who kind of did this with the microphone as they were doing announcements, it was just a matter of level change and not a whole lot of EQ change, as opposed to some of the good singing vocalist mics that the difference between this and this is pretty noticeable. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily. It's more a matter of understanding the tool. Mm-hmm. And well, you could, but yeah. Manual. Get the manual out. Look at the polar plot. That's the point here. Is that this is one of the useful pieces of information as you are trying to decide. Well, I've got an SM57, an SM58, a RE20, and a something else. I need to mic the violin. Which one's going to be a better choice? Because I'm going to have the microphone over here, or whatever. It's one of the pieces of information that can be helpful as you're doing your job.